Good afternoon, everybody. This is Unprecedented TV, brought to you by Delivering Liberty. It's been quite welcome to everybody who's joined the show already on Unprecedented TV's YouTube channel and X/Twitter account, and obviously my Delivering Liberty YouTube account as well. But many of you probably not seen me in a while, and I do welcome you all back. Thank you for the support already. It's been quite a week. Obviously, I do the show every Tuesday now at about 1:30 to 2 p.m. pending time of the previous presenter. And last week I had quite a what some would call a controversial guest in the form of former BNP leader Nick Griffin. And it's funny how what's happened, the conversation that we had talking about clandestine organizations in terms of intelligence operations and various other things. And it's since then, only like a few days after that show, having spoken about really mostly what I and Nick, even though we come from different political backgrounds and persuasions, we have somehow come to the conclusion, as much as conspiratorial it may sound, that there is a stranglehold, and this is my opinion. This isn't the opinion of the Unprecedented TV network, because I don't really know everyone else, all the other presenters' opinions on it. But I do believe that there is a stranglehold, really, a great influence from this very small nation in the Middle East that has been building up even long before the creation of Israel. And since then, I remember I was coming out of the gym on, was it Thursday night, I believe? Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, in the chat. I think it was Thursday night, UK time, I mean. And I was bombarded by messages that Charlie Kirk, the very, very well-known political commentator in the USA, of Turning Point USA. We have a sister organization here led by UKIP leader Nick Tenconi at Turning Point UK, that Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. And this was quite obviously a shock to many. Although I and people like David Clues of Unity News Network, UNN, has also been kind of speaking about similar topics, especially with what could be seen as a UK equivalent, Tommy Robinson, but in a different kind of capacity, but kind of similar in what way, in terms that we believe that they are essentially paid and controlled by Israel in order to herd people, his followers, into a certain direction to, in a way, capture. It's almost like containment, like casting a net. You have dissident-minded people. They're starting to question things. They're starting to break away from that classic left-right divide, which I think is just a matrix in itself, a division tactic. And people are starting to, what would be termed, leave the matrix in a way. But then you get people who are paid to basically capture those people who are starting to wake up and leave the matrix, such as people like Charlie Kirk, people like Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins, Ben Shapiro, also, and various others, that basically herd those dissident-minded people and redirect them back into the system, back into the matrix. They'll perhaps speak like any great con. Usually 80% of the con is truth, and then the remaining 20% is the con itself. So these people will say things that you agree with. They'll say stuff like, oh, isn't there a lot of, they'll use terms like Islamification of the West. And you agree with that. You'll go, oh, well, yeah, yes, because obviously you can see that happening. It's a very visible, noticeable phenomenon that is bestowing upon the West. However, what they won't tell you, and what they are paid to not tell you, to connect that final dot, is that there is more to it than meets the eye. Where, and let me give you an example. I mean, look. At the end of the day, I have no. What happened to Charlie Kirk? I mean, people are saying he's not even dead. I personally do believe he is dead. That's my personal opinion. There might be some people who disagree with me on that. but I do think that is happening. I do think that is a real possibility of what has occurred. Because at the end of the day, and I'm sure, I mean, do we need to show more videos of this? That Charlie Kirk was essentially starting to basically wake up and starting to notice certain things that perhaps Israel, I mean, let's just show a random video. But when I get a guest on, who is a former intelligence operative, former MI5 operative, David Shayler, who I think some will know, and I'll get him on shortly after this. But it's videos like this, and there's various others where Charlie Kirk, I mean, how can I say this? I mean, Charlie Kirk for many years was paid by organizations linked to the state of Israel, who he was paid essentially, one of the greatest assets, I think personally, who was paid to go from university to university and convert the soft mind, and I don't mean that in insult, just lack of a better word, the very impressionable minds, I should say, of students to ultimately be pro-Israel. And that was his job. Now, I don't know if people are aware, but there was also another individual who, and I do want to get David Shayler's opinion on this. Let's just play this first, and I'll talk about Gad Saad. If people do remind me, in case I forget about it in the chat, please do remind me to ask David about Gad Saad once I explain what that is. But let's just listen to some of what Charlie Kirk had to say. This is only 2 days before he was assassinated, by the way. So let's just have a little listen.
And Jewish donors, they have a lot of explaining to do, a lot of decoupling to do, because Jewish donors have been the #1 funding mechanism of radical, open border, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policies, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. This is a beast created by secular Jews. And now it's coming for Jews, and they're like, what on earth happened? And it's not just the colleges. It's the nonprofits. It's the movies. It's Hollywood. It's all of it. It's like time for you guys to wake up and say no more. Draw a line in the sand. I don't care if you hate me.
It's quite interesting as well, because obviously in the chat here, someone said, where was it? Is that Ben Shapiro now, enter name here. Ben Shapiro is now looking to take over Turning Point USA. A lot of people don't know Turning Point USA made $18 million, according to their last account records. They brought in $80 million annually. And what did I say? I thought a little comment on this, basically saying, if I can find it, that is, I probably won't be able to find it now, is that Ben Shapiro is now to take over. Now, I put, here it is. This is from, I think this is Jake Shields, not too sure. UNN shared this. Ben Shapiro is going to take over Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, just like he took over Breitbart when Andrew Breitbart died. And apparently, he rumored that he was killed as well. Breitbart has a famous sort of saying that it was, even though it was born in America, it was made in Israel. That's a famous quote by Breitbart. What's a lucky guy? That's like a $6 million chance, obviously being tongue in cheek there of that last comment. Turning Point USA made $80 million annually, according to his last accounts. And no doubt, due to Kirk's death, this will probably rise. It will. They will use him as a martyr, and they will exploit his death, that I personally think was arranged by Israel. Yes, it might, the person who pulled the trigger or the fall guy will be this transgender individual, a patsy, a Lee Harvey Oswald of today, who I don't believe obviously killed JFK. I think that, again, he was a fall guy. If you look at the recent JFK files that were released a few months ago, even Trump released and said that it was, well, he didn't say it, but the files itself indicated Israel. They will use his death to make money for Israel, a state which Kirk was starting to question, the final sick insult. So they will use that guy. I think even though he was waking up near the end, they will basically use this guy. It's like it's the ultimate insult in a way. It's terrible what's going on. But that so it is believed that, I think, that Israel were behind it. But let me I want to bring on a guest to discuss this further. I saw him last week on Basil Valentine's show, another unprecedented TV host. He was coming on. I thought it was so fascinating listening to David's thoughts on this that I had to bring him on. So I will bring him on now just to discuss this. Welcome to the show, David. How are you?
Hi there. Thanks very much for having me on. Great.
Yeah, it's great. Again, I apologize. You might be regurgitating the same things that you said last week, but I thought it was quite, now that the dust has almost settled in a way, and we know a bit more information about it, I thought that perhaps it'll be quite interesting to hear your take on it again, and if any new opinions have come to your mind. But if you don't mind, David, I'll just briefly I prepared a little introduction for you, and obviously after I read it, if there's anything incorrect, please do correct me after that, if that's totally fine, if that's totally okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
David Shayler, he joined MI5 in 1991, working in various departments, and left in 1996 after reportedly discovering an MI6 plot to assassinate Libyan leader Colonel Gaddafi, which is quite funny now, obviously since then, using the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the LIFG. Shayler claimed MI6 had sponsored the LIFG to bomb Gaddafi's motorcade in February 96, an attempt that resulted in civilian casualties. He since then fled to France with his then partner, another former MI5 officer, to avoid arrest. In August 97, Shayler passed documents onto the Mail on Sunday, revealing that MI5 had files on prominent Labour Party figures, including Peter Mandelson, again funny after the week we've had, Jack Straw and Harriet Harman, and had investigated them due to perceived socialist sympathies. He also alleged that MI5 failed to prevent the 1993 Bishopgate bombing and had prior knowledge to a planned 1994 attack on the Israeli embassy in London. These revelations led to the prosecution under the Official Secrets Act, 1989. Shayler was arrested in Paris in 98, but a French judge ruled that extradition request was politically motivated and ordered his release. He returned to the UK, was arrested at Dover, and later sentenced to 6 months in prison, breaching the Official Secrets Act. Shayler defended himself at trial, arguing that he was exposing a crime that the Official Secrets Act was incompatible with the Human Rights Act, rights to freedom of expression. However, the courts rejected this argument, ruling that the act imposed a lifelong duty of confidentiality on intelligence officers. So it kind of implies that basically the Human Rights Act doesn't basically mean anything really, preventing them from disclosing information without official authority. Prosecution did not need to prove these allegations were true and the national security was damaged, proving he passed information to the press without authorization. How is that for an introduction, David? Is there anything there you disagree with?
No, very good. No, very accurate and succinct summary of what I've done over the years. Yeah, absolutely spot on.
I thought I'd just read that out. I don't normally do that, but I thought in order to show your credentials in a way, rather than you having to perhaps, because I know watching the previous show, I know obviously some people may have not known exactly who you were, but I thought I'd read that out just to give you a proper introduction. So David, so obviously it's been an interesting week. What's your? I mean, I think I'll just let you speak, mate, because I just want to know your opinion on what has happened. And obviously, it's in connection with, I think, 3 big stories of the week that has gone. Obviously, the Charlie Kirk assassination. I think that the Tommy Robinson rally and the Peter Mandelson. I feel as though all of those 3 things have one thing in common, and that's the state of Israel. I mean, what's your opinion on all those 3 things and the week in general? Just please, just go with it. Go.
Can I say that as soon as I heard about the Charlie Kirk assassination on the BBC that morning, I went online. The first thing I put out was that Charlie Kirk was joining the congregation of martyrs murdered at hand of Zionist assassin. And that was before I'd done any research. I just heard the initial BBC reports, yeah. Because over the years, you come to an understanding of how these things work, how Mossad has carried out a series of false flag operations and blamed other people, or people working to a Zionist brief. And that obviously, although people may find it surprising, includes MI6. When they were funding Islamic terrorism against Colonel Gaddafi, they were working in the interests of Israel to be able to secure the Middle East with a puppet government, basically. And of course, in the case of Lockerbie, which you didn't mention, although the Libyans were guilty of that, I'd done the research to prove that in MI5, we had MI6 blaming Palestine and Iran again. So what we have with the Charlie Kirk shooting just fits into an entire pattern we've seen, not just related to normal terrorism things, but to shootings as well. The Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support the idea that that shooting happened. There's all sorts of other weird stuff going on around it, involving things like the Church of Satan and the mortgages being cancelled on Christmas Day, I think 2009, I think it was, 3 years before the attack. So to spell this out, absolutely, as soon as I saw the Charlie Kirk thing, I thought it was Israel. And pretty much the evidence for that started to emerge very, very quickly, how Charlie had changed his view. And I know from this, say from blowing the whistle early on, one other thing you didn't mention was the fact that I also was blowing the whistle on the fact that a senior MI5 officer who'd reviewed the investigation into the bombing of the Israeli embassy in July 1994 in London believed that Israel themselves had carried out that attack, even though they didn't disclose that to the court and 2 Palestinians were convicted. So very early on, I got a heads up about Israel. I got heads up about false flag terrorism in the form of MI6 funding Islamic extremists to carry out their work by assassinating Gaddafi. I joined the services to stop terrorism and suddenly realized I was on the wrong side. In fact, I've probably concluded now I'm on the wrong side in all of it, even my work against the IRA, given the way the British treated the IRA and factors like the shoot to kill policy in Northern Ireland essentially gave the grounds to a lawful resistance in the form of the IRA. Now, obviously, many British people will hate me for saying that, but looking at it objectively, you've got to come to that conclusion. The British Army there was an occupying power in the same way Israel has been an occupying power for a very long time now in the West Bank and obviously for years in the Gaza Strip. And if people do not come together to remove occupiers, people will inevitably take up arms against them. So that is all lawful as well. But it does come back to Israel. What I find amazing on the internet is just the concerted response and the nature of that response, how sophisticated it has been, dealing with the usual Israeli rebuttals we get about these things. They'll come up with some line that doesn't make any sense, but it's something they can repeat in the mainstream and some of the alternative internet shows. But the internet, all sorts of different researchers have been rebutting all this stuff straight away. I don't believe anybody who knows anything about the Kennedy assassination can think this is other than a patsy, Tyler Robinson. It has all the hallmarks of being a patsy. I mean, they are now saying they found the DNA on the gun and the blanket, but that's so obviously and easily plantable. And one thing we do know from situations like 9/11 and 7/7 is Israel will plant a trail to somebody else. Not only will they carry out the attack, but they will then lead a very convincing trail to other people. And that's exactly what happened in the case of 9/11 and 7/7. I don't know how people are how far up they are on these things, but once you do your own research, I'll put together a document about this. It's available on my website, bookofthelaw.org, showing there's no evidence whatsoever for Muslims. This was just assertion made by the FBI. In the case of 7/7, the photograph they used to try and establish the men's guilt to start with was an obvious fake, basically. So, all of these things all point back to Israel, all the convincing evidence. The dancing Israelis on the day of 9/11 knew about the attacks before they happened. They were there to cheer them on and document them. on the day of 9/11, Benjamin 7/7, sorry, in London, Benjamin Netanyahu was given a warning about an hour or so before the attacks from Mossad. So it didn't come from British intelligence, showing that Mossad knew about those attacks beforehand. An Israeli company owned the CCTV coverage on the London Underground, so that would have given them access. So again, they have the capability.
Apparently, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that Charlie Kirk's security that he had around him on the day of his assassination was an Israeli company. I heard. I don't know if that is. Did you hear that by chance?
I've heard that. Yeah, I haven't checked it out, but I have heard it. But I say they've got a hand in everything. I mean, I've been talking about this for a good. I mean, obviously, I blew the whistle on Israel first 28 years ago, but as my understanding has become more sophisticated, I've alerted people 20 years ago. I was telling people to look at Israel being behind 9/11 and missiles surrounded by holograms being used, all of which now approved with reference to primary source documentation. And I've been telling people for a very long time that all the institutions of Britain, the BBC, the media, the legal system, the civil service have been infiltrated by Zionist agents of one form or another. That's the kind of orchestrated infiltration you need to be able to control a message like this. And obviously keep something as obvious as the truth about 9/11 and 7/7 completely out of the mainstream, completely away from MPs and mainstream journalists. That takes a hell of a lot of agents of influence and threats and bribes and so on. So that has been the refreshing thing about the Charlie Kirk thing. It has been, like we've seen, an awakening across the planet, really, of people. I mean, obviously, this is a terrible, terrible thing. I'm not one of those people saying it was faked. I'm saying that we don't know what happened in terms of the details of the death. As yet, as usual, we've seen things like the crime scene being scrubbed, which is classic one of these things. There should be CCTV that was from a camera that was removed. We haven't seen that, so we're seeing the hallmarks, I say, but a false flag operation essentially. But we don't know the details of how he was actually killed, whether it was a long-range sniper or not, or whether it might have been somebody in the crowd. We can only come to that conclusion through proper forensic research. But nevertheless, it has led to an awakening of mankind in terms of people seeing who the enemy is, people tapping into new ideas. I mean, I found the left just totally out of touch on this issue. And obviously the other issue you were mentioning was the Patriot March in London. Now, I'd like to say I'm a patriot. I believe in my country, right or wrong. When it's right, I support it. When it's wrong, I oppose it. That is the true view of the patriot. The patriot's not the nationalist who says my country right or wrong and goes around dissing other people's country. The patriot is a man who loves his own country. And there are good reasons, although we've been brought up with a very, very skewed history and so on, there are good reasons to love this country, and not to do with kings and queens and all that kind of thing, to do with Magna Carta and trade unions and a basic understanding of the fundamental rights over government that existed until obviously well into my lifetime, and then suddenly have been eroded. But again, we're realizing by these groups that are backed by the Zionist financiers who come in and take over any kind of left-wing opposition to what is really going on. Sorry about this. I've just got
as someone said, Jeep Wave said that, you know, they also. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it. Don't worry, I'll keep it going. So it's, yeah, like one of the comments says, they also control the left. They do. You see the people just as how what you would call the right wing, you know, I hate using the old archaic language, I believe, is that, yeah, the left and the right wing is that they are both controlled by, quite funnily enough, the same kind of, it's quite, as Charlie Kirk would say, these wealthy Jewish individuals, and they get money, as we said last week on how when we had Nick Griffin on, is that, like, look at GB News, they're funding what would be from people who are from the left. That's George Soros. You have the Legatum Institutes partnered up with the WEF. These are what the viewers of GB News, who would be considered put in that right-wing box, would consider left-wing people. So this whole idea, I do think going forward, we need to get out of our minds this left and right kind of box labeling and get out of that. So we saw, like, during the 2021, 2022, I put a post about it, basically saying that, you know, there is big numbers that has been reported on the rally. And I say, as in here, we've got here with Robinson and Hopkins, cast your minds back to 2021, 2022. Every month for at least 6 months, there were anti-lockdown.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, David. Every month for the last 6 months, there were anti-lockdown marches, which either rivaled the number of the Tommy March on Saturday or exceeded them. These were, at the time, the biggest consecutive marches in recent years, with many estimating up to 1 million at its peak. However, the media would rarely give spotlight to these marches. These marches, or greatly downplayed the number to hundreds. Now, over the past day, all media are greatly covering Tommy's numbers. The question is why? The rallies are beneficial to the state's overall agenda. To have white/Christian versus brown Muslims, mass arrests of dissidents, and overall support for Israel's empire building in the Middle East, meaning more wars on the expense of our soldiers and many European and Western soldiers. It further fuels arguments Tommy and Hopkins are assets to the regime in some form. These two are known to take foreign money from pro-Israel linked groups such as Robert Schulman, David Howowitz, Rebel News, in exchange for Israel support and to subvert the UK masses. These individuals are not patriots. David, we'll continue. You're basically just bouncing off on what you said about the weekend Patriot March. I don't think it was a Patriot March. I think it was very much a containment mechanism to make you think it was Patriots March. But ultimately, there is this sinister undertone of Israeli support. I mean, what's your take on it?
I've been going around the country and talking to people just recently, and most people who consider themselves be patriots or involved, like truth and freedom movements in local towns, want to distance themselves from Tommy Robinson. A lot of them have seen through the fact you say that he is an absolute Zionist puppet. That said, I did recently send in my research about, as I was talking about, Israel being responsible for 9/11 and 7/7. Obviously, I don't know whether he's read it or not, but certainly I've sent it to him. So I think there is a genuine upswell of patriotism in this country, but genuine patriotism, not Tommy Robinson sort of thing. It's very easy to go and wave a flag, much more difficult to stand up to the evil of your government for your fellow men who share the land with you. But that's what we're seeing. We're seeing on all sides people power. Rejecting essentially what has been establishment left and establishment right. And the line that has been held by these Zionist infiltrators, say for a very long time now, is finally crumbling. Only the people they are paying are still in any way defending Israel, and it's getting increasingly difficult for them to do that. But the reason it creates a patriot movement is people are realizing that they've been lied to for a very, very long time now by a kind of conspiracy coming out of the whole mainstream, I say, involving the mainstream media and television and politicians and government and the legal system and NGOs, the whole lot of them. But that's why it's creating a vacuum in terms of patriotism. So a true patriot wants to make his country a good country so he can love it. And that's what I mainly got the impression from looking at if you looked at lots and lots of images of that demonstration, most people were good-natured and would want to talk up this country. There are obviously people wanting free speech, because the traditional of this country is you can criticize people, you can say extraordinary things in this country. And as long as they're not causing harm, loss, or injury to a fellow man, that was allowed. But again, we're putting people in trial in prison for media posts, tweets on social media and things, at a far greater rate than Russia, which of course the media will tell you is run by a dictator. So our traditional
it's even worse in America because you had, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State for the US, he was over in Israel just yesterday, also kissing the Wailing Wall and with Benjamin Netanyahu, which is not a usual sight. You don't always see the Prime Minister of Israel with American or any leaders. So that in itself, I think, was almost like a bowing to the masters, really, I think personally. But you also had this bill that was introduced by a congressman in America who was a former IDF soldier and holds a dual citizenship to Israel, which is quite incredible, really, when you think about that. Introduced a bill that basically, if there's any criticism of Israel, then you even as a person who was born in the United States, you can have your citizenship removed, which is just, I mean, it apparently has been rejected, but the fact that that actually reached Congress and was actually debated upon, despite this country supposedly having, obviously the American Constitution and these supposed protected rights, it's incredible that that was introduced, that even born citizens of the United States, forget about their race or color or whatever, it could be white Americans, they could have their citizenship revoked. And that was a general thing that was considered, introduced by a former IDF soldier who holds dual loyalty. And I don't think, when I say dual loyalty, I don't think that in the sense that he holds two loyalties, but I think his only loyalty is really to Israel. He's got no real interest. And the fact that these people are basically infecting American politics, and we have individuals here. I mean, it's shocking that we have. I was discussing this a couple of weeks ago with Lembit, OPEC, former Lib Dem MP, is that you have at the moment, you have Keir Starmer, who happens to be married to a Jewish woman. You now have the Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, also married to a Jewish woman. You have the new Green Party leader, his background of being Jewish. And you've got the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, who is just a slavishly loyal Zionist guy. And I think the whole attacks on Nigel Farage, as much as I'm not really a supporter of Nigel Farage, that I think the real reason for his attack by the split in the, whatever you want to call it, the right wing or whatever, is that you're getting a battle now between people who are slightly Zionist and people who are ultra Zionist. You're getting all of like the Rupert Lowe sort of crowd, the Tommy Robinson crowd, the Elon Musks as the sort of people that are just basically splitting it because Nigel and Reform are not Zionist enough, because he's looking likely to be the next prime minister and governing party of the thing. And I think the attack is again subvertively coming from Israel under the guise of Elon Musk and others to basically make this guy slavishly, because he's not loyal enough to. I mean, I won't be surprised in the upcoming next general election of the UK. I won't be shocked to see Nigel Farage visiting Israel and doing as Marco Rubio did yesterday and kissing that wall to show slavish loyalty. I mean, what's your take on it all, David?
For many decades now, it's been compulsory for anybody before they become prime minister to actually say somewhere on the public record that they are a Zionist. You can find these things online, and they will declare that before they're, it will be some public place, because we know they like to declare things publicly. They don't do it totally secretly. Won't be reported on the news, of course, but nevertheless, that footage will be there for anybody who wants to find it. And they will all declare they are Zionists. That's how powerful. People call it the Israeli lobby and the deep state, but we have to understand that it comes from the Zionist bankers mainly. I don't know if you know this, but the British state, and this is according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, so the government's own figures, or an independent office funded by the government, is that we're paying $4 billion a week now in interest on the national debt. That's just an astronomical sum. They recently tried to save $6 billion by taking away benefits from disabled people. It's absolutely extraordinary. So we have to understand that this does go back into the banking issue, because that's where they make their main money. It obviously also goes into things like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, who seem to control most of the world's companies now, basically. We've talked often about there being 6 major owners of the media and so on, but it does appear to go back into BlackRock and Vanguard mainly. So we have to understand how this has been financed as well. And in that financing, I say, is all sorts of dishonesty, that the BlackRock and Vanguard run hedge funds, and hedge funds essentially bet on failure, shorting as it's known in the trade. And you can induce failure, but you can't induce success. And I would suggest that is a major part of the corruption, is them inducing companies to fail. And that is part of what is funding, I say, this Zionist takeover of the world. But what is good news is that they are doing these crazy things like trying to take people's passports off them, but it is being beaten by the political system. And it's just getting people out there more and more angry. When October the 7th first happened, there were people, even from what people I knew, still saying Israel had a right to self-defense. Now, virtually nobody mentions that. Not even in the mainstream do they mention Israel's right to self-defense. And we've had the other good news as well, is the declaration by the UN that this does meet, an official body of the UN saying that Israel's action in Gaza do reach the definition of a genocide. So there's nowhere really for people to go now with that whole thing. But I'd say that these things are inextricably linked. People across the political spectrum are absolutely horrified by what Israel has done in Gaza and are therefore now prepared to believe the other horrors Israel has committed, like the Kennedy assassination, like the USS Liberty. We've realized this country is a terrorist nation, and it has just used this extraordinary
David, you are correct, but what I've noticed, and I've noticed with this a particular media YouTube account that, well, actually two I can think of, that basically I think one is definitely somehow like an operation by Israel in order to keep people questioning things in terms of like keeping to the narrative. And there's one I think that is just basically drunken the Kool-Aid on it all, and it's just basically regurgitating, not knowing, no bad intentions. And the two are the Spiked. I don't know if you heard of Spiked magazine, Spiked Online, with Brendan O'Neill and Claire Fox, who is now in the House of Lords, who's very highly suspicious because this renegade woman apparently has somehow been allowed to enter the House of Lords, similar to how Toby Young of the Free Speech Union, again, another supposedly dissident-minded individual, has been allowed entry into the House of Lords somehow. They, I think, and the readers of Spiked Online and also the online YouTuber, the podcast, the Lotus Eaters, I've been speaking to a lot of their followers, and they are so narrow-minded in the sense that they do not quite understand it's almost like a blind spot, you could say. They just do not understand that the clandestine nature of organizations such as Mossad or even MI6, or they're aware of what they are, obviously, but they do not know the exact the exact lengths that these organizations will go to in order to achieve a certain agenda. And it is you're seeing what I'm sure you know what like Operation Mockingbird was or is. I always say is that it never really ended. Is that it was the intelligence, agenda to infiltrate the media, and I don't think that ever really ended. I think it kind of evolved into basically what would be considered alternative media, such as like I think personally. Have you heard of an individual called Gad Saad by chance, David?
Yeah.
Did you know that he came out? He wrote an autobiography and basically admitted that he was a Mossad agent. Were you aware of this?
I'm not sure I was aware of that. No, actually, no. I've seen him come across.
It was. Let me just for context, just for our audience, and obviously for yourself, this was quite something. And keeping in mind, to this day, Tommy Robinson cites Gad Saad. Gad Saad, if people don't know, is still a big YouTuber. He had a 6-figure following, like something like 300,000 odd or whatever it was. And basically, he was basically the Jordan Peterson before Jordan Peterson in a way. He was an academic college lecturer, and similar to Charlie Kirk, his job basically, and a lot of people don't think about this. His job was basically to go around from university to university and basically convert people's minds. Essentially, let me just put it on just to explain what I mean.
couldn't believe it in the book. You let the cat out of the bag. You're actually a Mossad agent.
Oh, you are the first person on my media tour to actually either have read that far into the book or to mention it. I thought it would be the top story in every show.
I mean, this is serious. This is serious stuff, and most people, they're not as candid about this stuff.
I thought that maybe I had extended the statute of limitation, that they won't come after me at this point. Do you want me to tell that story?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So that actually is something that I discuss in the chapter on play, the importance of living your life with a playful mindset. Now you might say, how does the Mossad fit with play? Well, so when I was about 18 years old, I had a cousin who had come from hey, I have a friend of mine who would like to meet you, to chat with you. I'm thinking,
Apologies, I was muted there. Like I was saying, it's basically that this guy went from uni to uni, basically doing what he did, and because of the statute of limitations, he basically sort of got away with it. But to this day, you get individuals basically citing this guy as a great inspirational leader. I mean, is this you, David? Obviously, your personal experience in MI5. Was this basically a typical tactic of the British security services and others, that they would basically indoctrinate young minds? Was there like a sort of a practice? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, when I was in MI5, I discovered that MI6 had a section called information operations, and it was their job to essentially plant stories in the media that were said to be favourable to the country, but were generally favourable to MI6 rather than the country and MI6's friends in the world of the oil industry and the arms industry. But I had a very good example of it again, where I found out they were planting false stories about Lockerbie and Iran being responsible in the media using the Sunday Telegraph. But also another one where they libelled Colonel Gaddafi's son. I was working on the Libyan desk, saw an article in the Sunday Telegraph saying that Gaddafi's son had been doing something, forging Iranian currency, I think it was. Anyway, I asked MI6 what they knew about this, because obviously it'd be of interest for me to investigate. And I actually found out that it was a made-up story planted by MI6. And as a result, Gaddafi's son sued the Sunday Telegraph and won the case. The Sunday Telegraph apologised completely.
It sounds very much like the Ministry of Truth in 1984, where Winston Smith worked, where basically his job, Winston, was to basically edit basically history or the current affairs of the day. Was essentially MI5 and 6 basically kind of like a Ministry of Truth like organization?
Much more so MI6 than MI5, but certainly there were elements of that to do with MI5 as well. I came across not when I was there, but afterwards, something called the Zinoviev letter, which if people don't know, in about 1924, shortly before a British general election, there was a letter that was leaked to the Daily Mail that claimed to be essentially a communication with the Comintern, the Communist International, the Bolsheviks, and the Labour movement in Britain. And Ramsay MacDonald, who was standing in the election, was asked about this letter. He didn't know anything about it. And there was an implication, therefore, that the Labour Party was somehow plotting with Bolsheviks abroad. And people said that didn't influence the election, but it clearly did. Labour weren't elected at that election. And I did see from the freedom of information research I did later on that an MI5 officer who was involved in that was also responsible for destroying some documents in the 1950s. So you can't understand how they create a story that gets reported everywhere. And this obviously was a very big case at the time, the Zinoviev letter. And then somebody who's involved in it destroys the evidence. So now we can't know, but if we've got suspicious mind, we can obviously guess that this was a forgery or a fake coming from MI5 or an MI6, and they had to destroy evidence of that, basically.
David, you speak about the Labour Party. Another Labour leader, Harold Wilson. I heard a story once that obviously we all know Harold Wilson famously for the winter of discontent and the massive national strikes that were occurring at the time. I heard an interesting theory. Obviously, I did believe, obviously, because it's Labour and it's socialism and it fails and all of that. But I heard an interesting theory a few years ago that the real reason why there were all of these strikes and the media was against Harold Wilson was that because he was the last prime minister the last prime minister we ever had that was actually sympathetic to Palestine and was actually against, quite openly against Israel. I mean, have you heard this before? And that's the real reason why all of the attacks occurred, similar to like Jeremy Corbyn. Is it? I mean, did you ever hear about that, Harold Wilson?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, one of the things that came up, there's a book came out in the 1980s called Spycatcher by a former MI5 officer called Peter Wright. This was before I was in the intelligence services, but I was editor of a student newspaper, and I published extracts of it when it was under injunction. So I got to read the book when it was banned, and that was alleging that certain MI5 and MI6 officers were essentially believed that Wilson was a KGB agent, and they were monitoring for that reason. Now, again, I don't believe that's the case. Having read about Harold Wilson and so on, you can see he was a good man for the background he came from. He wasn't part of the establishment. And you're right, he had no time for Israel. Crucially as well, wouldn't provide troops for the Vietnam War. And that meant America in Vietnam was by itself. So that whole Vietnam thing just became an American war. If British troops had gone out there, of course, that would have changed the complexion of it. But they could have argued it was one of these coalition of the willing kind of ideas. So that's one of the reasons they brief against Wilson. And I also believe it's the same reason they brief against what's his name, buddy? Edward Heath. They say he's a paedophile. But nothing that's been sourced to anybody has ever turned up to be true about that. And again, he opposed the sending troops to Vietnam. So both of those leaders are having their characters destroyed by the essentially the Zionist nasties. But they were both good men who were opposed to war and tried to run the country fairly, and were probably, the last two prime ministers who weren't totally manipulated. From then on, it's downhill, and obviously Margaret Thatcher destroyed this country and sold it to the bankers. Tony Blair was a war criminal, and virtually all of them since then have been war criminals, and now they're genociders.
It's quite interesting. Obviously, I didn't hear that perspective on Edward Heath because I have always believed that he was what the rumours do say of him. But it's quite, especially with the Harold Wilson stuff, it's quite interesting when you hear this perspective after you realise you become aware of the massive influence on Israel, and obviously, especially Israel, like they seem to control the media, the politics, the various other things, big pharma, various other things. And when you hear about these things, then it does put. I mean, it's like I used to be very much against Jeremy Corbyn, and I still am in a lot of ways. But the attack at the time in 2019 general election is you then come with it again at fresh eyes, and you can see that clearly that was a clear display of a Zionistic attack upon him because like Wilson, he was very much against, not that I'm saying that I would have agreed with his policy, probably would have made a lot of policies that I disagreed with, but he would not have kowtowed to, I think, the Israel lobby, I think personally. And I think that was the true reason. I mean, especially when you see what Boris did as soon as he came in, who knows what Corbyn would have done, but the lockdowns, the Boris wave, the 1 million migrants into the country a year. I mean, that's not what the Conservative voters wanted, I could imagine. Do you know what I mean? David, just to sort of get back on topic of Charlie Kirk, it's very interesting, don't get me wrong, but just to bring you back on this, I found this really interesting. So I remember hearing last week on the show, on Basil's show, that how these organizations, they kind of have insider knowledge, as you said, like how similar to the BBC reported on the Tower 7 from falling 20 minutes before it did, but also gave kind of detail as to why Tower 7 fell, even though you can clearly see it in the background, still the live reporting. I was quite interested in, I'm going to put it on the screen here, so insider knowledge, especially how it was also the Jerusalem Post that were the first to report on Charlie Kirk's assassination. And also it was Benjamin Netanyahu who tweeted out the news of Charlie Kirk's death before even Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk were arguably more closer in terms of in any sort of relationship. But I found this quite interesting. There was a book released the day before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and it was released on Amazon as a waiting list book that was to come out. And the book was called, keeping in mind this was the day before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, the book was called The Shooting of Charlie Kirk. What's this all about, David? What's your take on this?
Well, so a bit like with Building 7 on the day of 9/11, where you might think perhaps they're following a script and someone suddenly got ahead of the script and then meant that the reporting of Building 7 collapsing and the causes of its collapse are reported about 20 minutes or so beforehand, not just by the BBC, but by CNN and Fox News as well. But we've had this before, going back to the 2012 shooting in Sandy Hook in the US, when Adam Lambs is said to have gone on a spree. The same thing happened there when people started looking at the internet. They found that fundraising sites had been set up the day before the attack. And again, people did all the research on the internet. People came up with all the ideas like I did to try and test it to see if it was something to do with time zones or whatever on the internet. But no, this was established to be done the day before. And as I was saying earlier on, in the case of Sandy Hook, there's absolutely no evidence to support that attack whatsoever. There's also evidence that the children who died then sang the Super Bowl song at halftime, and nobody pointed that out in the mainstream media, even though obviously lots of people on the internet have. So that gives you an idea of what they might call the chutzpah of these people. They don't just like doing these things, they like really rubbing it in our noses. As I say, a bit like with the fake picture from 7/7 of the supposed 4 guys outside Luton railway station. You can clearly see that's a fake because the railing goes in front of the guy's arm. They just haven't even tried to do a good fake. And I think that's something else that people are starting to realize and wake up to now is that how easy it is to expose all of this. It's absolutely simple. And people seem to have reached a level of consciousness where they can do that.
I heard, David, now maybe you can confirm this or not, that obviously a lot of the intelligence operatives, they like to, sort of similar to what was it called, the umbrella killing? A guy used a tip of an umbrella to basically put a cyanide. It was something like that. But basically, it was shown as yes, it was shown to be like, even though it was quite an ineffective way to kill someone, it was almost like an artist's. Like an artist showing his art in a way, in a sense that, I can kill someone in a really unusual but sophisticated kind of way. Do these intelligence operatives, like with this book, the shooting of Charlie Kirk, I once heard a rumor that a lot of the intelligence operatives, they basically do these type of things to basically, like, it's almost like a nod and a wink to signal other intelligence operatives to show how good they are at their work. It's like, I remember just recently, I don't know if you can cast your mind back a couple of months ago, where Craig Charles, who's now he was a former ambassador, now very close to Julian Assange activist, he released the news that the RAF jets that they're not really owned by the RAF themselves, but actually private hedge fund companies. And if you were to trace back the names of the follow the money, oddly enough, the name, I can't remember the name specifically now, and I have to do some research on it. Basically, the name of supposedly one of the individuals who owned this hedge fund was coincidentally named the name of a CIA agent within a James Bond fictional novel. And it's like, are these sort of like the signatures of intelligence operatives that basically are just trying to be funny and, you know, have a little bit of a banter almost, like with other intelligence? Oh, look what I did here. Oh, you know, is it that? Do they do that in the intelligence services?
Yeah, well, obviously they do communicate using the mainstream media. And again, I've got an example of this in my own case where the Sunday Times, they had been interviewing about stuff, and then suddenly out of the blue, there came this. When I was in prison in France, this headline came out saying, "Shayler, I can bring down government." And I'd obviously never ever said anything like that to the Sunday Times to do with my whistleblowing. However, I did know something about Blair, and that was that somebody had told me he was an MI5 agent during the 80s. I learned that in the early 1990s when files were being reviewed for the 1992 general election. But I didn't see it myself. But I interpreted that headline as being a warning to Blair that I might just know that, and therefore Blair should behave himself. You see what I mean? Because there was certainly no substance in the article. Anything I say in the article could be remotely construed as me saying that I could bring down the government. But that's what the headline said across the front of the Sunday Times. So clearly they use the media to communicate with each other. If you follow this stuff on the internet, you'll know that the number 33 seems to come up in all sorts of contexts of reportings of shootings and false flags and so on, which is obviously a number that's very dear to the Freemasons, for example. And again, do we know that's the Freemasons, or is it somebody just trying to point us in the direction of the Freemasons? One thing that's very difficult to determine is who is genuinely doing this stuff and who are the patsies who've been maneuvered into position by the people who are really orchestrating them.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to find that name because it's kind of bothering me now of the article, but I'm not going to find it now because it's just when I want it, I can't find it. David, obviously, I mean, it's just incredible. What's your take on the Epstein and Peter Mandelson situation at the moment? What's your opinion on Mandelson? Because I'm of the belief that essentially, I mean, if you look at Peter Mandelson's titles and awards that he's been given over the years, he's been given very much a lot. And I believe he sits on the King's Council at the Privy Council at the moment as well. Do you think, because I'm of the belief that Mandelson is essentially our equivalent to Jeffrey Epstein. Do you think he's some kind of spook of some sort, or do you what's your take on him?
Yeah, no, again, I think there's something. I don't think Mandelson is involved in child sex in the same way Epstein is, but in terms of the influence he's orchestrated and the information he's gathered on people over the years, he plays a similar role. There's always been these associations between Britain and America behind the scenes through these, they'll call them things like trade organizations and so on. But these again, you've got to understand, are all fronts for things like MI6 and the CIA and so on. So I think that Mandelson was an architect of what was going on. And I mean, let's face it, he was defending Blair when he was a war criminal. Mandelson was part of the people who argued to go into Iraq and Afghanistan when there was no case for that. We also know that he's very close to the Rothschilds. He's certainly holidayed on the Rothschilds' private yacht and things like that. So there is a proven evidential link to the Rothschilds, and that may explain how he's got so far in life. He does come from a very big Labour background, although if you want to get this up to real kind of conspiracy, kind of PhD level, It could be that he's one of these replacements where the Rothschilds take children at birth and replace them with their own progeny, and no one is told this at all, just so they can study how their own progeny fare if they come into another environment, not one where they've got the privileges of the Rothschilds and so on. And there's been an argument, well, I've certainly explored that idea that Mandelson is one of those, basically, and that accounts for why he has done so well.
So what just to obviously what do you think then your opinion is on Keir Starmer? Do you think Keir Starmer is a very compromised individual, and do you think he might be on his way out? He seems to get away with everything. It's amazing. I've never seen a guy go through quite a few political scandals in his time and just somehow just remain, keep excelling almost. What do you think he's done for? Do you just think that?
Yeah, it's over for Starmer, basically. It's completely over in all ways. We're just looking at what they call a dead man walking now, or a lame duck prime minister. He's just a question of when, really. Again, I've got personal knowledge of Starmer because he was one of my lawyers when I was taken to court and prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act. At the time, I thought
what was that like? What was that like?
Yeah, well, he was very strange, very quiet, and to me, he looked shifty all the time. And I do look back on this now and wonder if this was him.
That's every lawyer in general, isn't it?
Well, that's the problem partly. But he looked particularly shifty. And it's led me to wonder in recent times whether that was him reporting back to them so they knew about my defence. And his reward for that was, getting a career as being the Director of Public Prosecutions, for example, in his political career. So I think, like Blair, you almost look at these people being stewarded through the system by invisible hands. Their careers don't seem to stand up to normal scrutiny. Neither Blair nor Starmer were particularly dynamic men. Certainly, I say I've met Starmer personally. From people I know who met Blair, said that he had no real presence or anything like that. He wasn't a great man in any way. But if you say the right things that the Zionists in Israel like, you get shepherded through. And also, of course, you're stupid enough, they think, to never see through it. And Blair clearly fell into that category. Although I say even Blair must now be wondering whether he can carry on supporting Israel in this situation. Even Blair must be wondering that.
I think, personally, ever since 2020 and the coronavirus era, I think that was a significant shift in not just in the UK, but just in the world in general, in terms of, I think it was a great unveiling. I think I just think that now they don't care how obvious the corruption is. There's no urgency to basically hide what's going on, the greater agenda. And I think people like Starmer, I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't resign. I think he'll last to the next general election, whenever that will be, because I just think now they just don't care. I think that there's obviously a regime that acts actively against the people and is controlled remotely by probably Israel, or well, not just Israel, but the massive. It's not so much the country; it's more the how can I say it? The sort of Zionistic influence upon the West rather than the country itself. Do you know what I mean by that? Like,
the thing about the reason I think Starmer might go is he's completely lost the Parliamentary Labour Party. That's the different issue. It doesn't matter what the country think. But it makes it very, very difficult for them to keep pushing Starmer forward and doing stupid things when you've lost the party in Parliament. That's the big difference there. But nevertheless, Starmer is clearly there just to do their bidding. He's not an intelligent man. They do character profiling to realise the kind of people they can manipulate. Famous, I don't know if you remember, Common Purpose was one of these shadowy groups that got a lot of coverage about 20 years ago. And somebody was telling me that if you went along to one of their meetings, they did the psychological test. And if you got one result, it was like, thanks very much, here's the door. But if you got another result, it was thanks very much, come in kind of thing. So they know the kind of people they're working with, particular psychological profile, which accounts, I think, for how they got away with it for so long. They can choose particular people who genuinely can't see this stuff, although it's absolutely flabbergasting when you say how obvious the evidence is. And Starmer is one of those idiots. But and most of the cabinet are.
Well, they're definitely not. I do think that these people, the people in power now, I used to joke, because obviously I was a little bit in politics myself, is that I used to joke with David Curtin, for example, that the reason why I will never be elected or never get anywhere in politics is because we have a great handicap, and that's it. That is that we're too honest. And I think really politics rewards the untrustworthy and the basically people who lie. And I think that's the only reason why that politicians have this negative association with dishonesty and distrust, is because obviously they're the greatest people. They're the greatest liars in society, essentially.
Yeah.
They're the people who will sell out. They'll have no values whatsoever, and they'll just get places. Where people with conscience, with an ethical conscience, they just won't get anywhere, because they'll have to, in their political career, in their time, they will have to do dodgy deals in order and set out their own principles, if they have any, in order to get to the places that they want to be. That's why I just don't think politics is the answer. I mean, are you a person who is do you believe that you can vote your way out of this? Like, what's your take on the whole thing?
No, the age of politics was over a long time ago. I mean, I cut my teeth in politics in the 1980s at the time of the miners' strike and the strikes against Murdoch and things like that, all of which were lost by the left. And I saw that the left were pretty useless at being able to organize themselves, other than producing mass amounts of people to act as a mob. I saw that very early on, but also saw, of course, then the society drifting towards what appeared to be more like the right. And we now live under a form of fascism. And in a form of banking. There is actually a signed deed of indemnity between the Bank of England and the government that no one's ever heard of, that we're governed under, basically. And that's what I believe is about how they're taking all the money directly for the national debt. But nevertheless, we don't even know what we're ruled under. That's how crazy it is. So politics is not the way forward. Neither is conventional religion. The response of the church morally to this stuff, again, has been very, very slow. We've yet to really see any of the big churches. In fact, the Methodist Church did come out recently and call it a genocide in Gaza. But that should have been the way from the word go. If people are truly holy men and living under the covenant of love, you know the duty to do everything you can to protect your fellow man. And that's what the church should have been doing and hasn't been doing. So I believe this goes into something much deeper, what I would call spiritual activism. And a key part of that, of course, is taking back the land. We live under a land owned, say, by the church. We want to get some land off them, but also by an aristocracy that was essentially put in power by William the Conqueror nearly 1,000 years ago. And I don't believe those people should have all that land. So tenant farmers should be given their land. Other people should be allowed sufficient land to be able to look after themselves. And it's that kind of thinking that destroys the other side. You get instant localization, you get a return to the power of farming, you end mass agriculture, which is very bad ecologically. And of course, what we can do as well is grow massive crops of hemp and cannabis, which will take care of a lot of our health needs, basically. But all this stuff I say goes beyond politics, beyond conventional religion. It's about living under the law of love, which I've established through my research, is recognized in their law as a higher law, essentially. And one thing my research does show, that in Hebrew, the word covenant is Brit. So the Britom, the people of are the people of the covenant, basically. So I actually believe that things like Magna Carta and what's gone on in this country have been trying to preserve that law of love your neighbour as you love yourself, which is the basis of all compassion and wisdom. And of course, your rights under the law. If you believe in rights under the law, You have a duty to respect somebody else's rights under the law. This is that whole deal would be done by principle. I love your neighbour, you love yourself, is the very basis of that. So that's the only way forward. We need to understand that people don't understand the Bible, but we do know it's prophetic. The Bible tells us about there are those who will come who say they are Jews but are not. They are of the synagogue of Satan. They talk in Revelation about their deception being done with pharmakia, which is translated as sorcery, but could be translated as pharmaceuticals. So
I've heard that. Yes, I've heard that.
So what we're realizing is we've misinterpreted the Bible. The Bible has always been largely a prophetic, not an historical text. But it's a text, like many other spiritual texts, that talks about this end times and the setting up of a new society. And say it's happening on that level. I did a tarot reading, and again, I wasn't into that stuff at the time. And I drew, the first thing I had to deal with was the Tower card inverted. And I've since realized that if you look at the Tower card, it looks very like 9/11. You've got people jumping out of buildings, and you get a flash coming from the sky. It's not the building on fire, it's coming from the sky. And that, of course, foretells the use of directed energy weapons on 9/11.
Well,
but that's spiritual thing, because it clears away, it's clearing away, it's destruction, clearing the way for the new. And that's the process mankind has been going through in a hardcore way since 9/11. And we're now coming out of the other side of that and thinking in a different way. How do we run a society properly? Let's redistribute the land. Let's give people in their houses. Let's nationalize the industries that haven't worked as private industries, like the banks or the pharmaceuticals industry and so on. That's the way we've got to think about all this stuff, not in the conventional way people are thinking.
I heard that, this is again something I heard some while ago, is that the Judaic prophecy states that, in order, because obviously they have this in Israel, and I've always been quite fascinated by, and it's obviously going a bit off topic now into more religious sort of debate in a way. But I once heard that there is prophecies in Judea. Obviously, they need to get their ducks lined up essentially in order to have the return of their what they call Moshiach, their basically the Torah God, in order to the third temple needs to be rebuilt, which is currently a very sacred mosque in Palestine or Israel, currently under occupied. And there needs to be a red heifer sacrifice. But also before this, I heard that there needs to be 2 great towers that need to come down in the land of Edom, which is considered what many Jewish scholars consider to be like the West or America. And it's quite funny how, especially if I mean, do you believe that? I've heard you obviously say that you believe that Israel was behind 9/11. Is that the case?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There is the felling in the Bible of one famous tower, and that's the Tower of Babel. The Aramaic for that is Babylon, although it's never specifically referred to as a tower in the Bible. So the Bible is largely telling prophetic stories that illustrate truth under law. But nevertheless, the metaphor of the story of the Tower of Babel is this tower that's not built on firm foundations. And this is a metaphor for any society that's not built upon the law of love. It's not built on firm foundations and therefore will fall apart. And the falling apart of the Tower of Babel was what then led to the scattering of tongues. That was all the different languages, so mankind couldn't communicate with each other because we were speaking different languages. And some people will tell you, and I've seen newspaper articles even refer to this jokingly, that the Shard in London is the rebuilding of the Tower of Babel. And when you look at it, they've left a little bit at the top, so it looks slightly unfinished, like an unfinished work. And this is about, again, symbolically of humanity coming back together again. We're coming out of what the Hindus call the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, and going into the Kali Satya, the age of truth. And I say this is when we will put all things behind us, ideologies, national identities, and understand that as human beings, we have a hell of a lot more in common with each other than we think, basically. And as long as you don't let the small percentage of psychopaths take over, We can all get on with each other and do things. We don't need armies and police forces. We'll trust each other and we'll understand that.
I very much agree with that, David. I do agree. You know, obviously we're getting a bit off topic and we're going a little bit deeper spiritually, but I do believe in that, what you just said there. Yeah, I think that a lot of us do have a lot more in common than what others would try to convince you that you don't. And I think if, obviously, like you say, if these psychopaths weren't really about these control freaks, I think it was ultra control freaks. I think like anything, it's like any job that you ever had, there's always a colleague that you had or someone that you knew who was just this absolute control freak, and everything had to be done in a very specific way. And I think that's what these people are like. They're just ultra control freaks, that they just have this in their minds that everyone and everything has to be done and controlled in a specific way. And I think I know it's quite a simplistic maybe description of it. But I do think that's what it is. But yeah, I do agree with your sentiments on that. David, just to sort of like, obviously round off, because obviously you've been on the show for a while, and I don't want to keep you too long. But overall, in conclusion, let me just put this video on just to perhaps just to reinforce this. But obviously, like the other day, Kash Patel, who is obviously the FBI director, put this out, I think it was today or last night, about what he believes is the suspect. I just want to get your opinion on that and the overall conclusion then of what you think happened with Charlie Kirk. Let's listen to this for a second.
Family has collectively told investigators that he subscribed to left-wing ideology, and even more so in these last couple of years. And he had a text message exchange, the suspect, with another individual, in which he claimed that he had an opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and he was going to do it because of his hatred for what Charlie stood for. Those are factually accurate investigatory findings by the FBI that we've handed over to the local authorities and the federal authorities to make their prosecutorial decisions. But I believe in this instance of such public importance, the public has a right to know.
So obviously, Kash Patel famously said that there is no Epstein files to investigate. Do you agree with the director of the FBI in America? What's your conclusion overall of what has happened over the last week?
No, not at all, of course. I don't agree with the director of the FBI. We know, again, from 9/11, we have all the evidence now showing how prior to 9/11, FBI officers were stopped from investigating key Islamic suspects, some of which were involved with flying schools and so on. So we know that was done by the FBI. After 9/11, the FBI doesn't actually investigate 9/11 at all. So the FBI is no expert in these circumstances. And we're yet to really see stuff that we're supposed to be seeing here, like casings and stuff like that. The evidence we're getting is often second-hand. The kind of stuff that can be very easily planted. I say, even when they say they've got this DNA on a gun and a blanket, that doesn't prove anything other than this DNA's on a gun and a blanket. That could quite easily have been manipulated. Somebody could have given him the gun and the blanket, so his DNA on his, when he didn't realize what was going on, or they could have got his DNA from somewhere else and planted it there. So none of that is conclusive. And the left-wing stuff is all part of a script, basically, in which this time they're blaming the left and the transgendered. Now, again, that's part of the wider thing with the Zionists. The Zionists were pushing the left. They pushed the left for well over a decade. But because of Palestine, they've fallen out with the left. Now, once they fall out with you, they go for you. They go after you. I think that's what happened with their control of Al-Qaeda, Israel's control of Hamas. The reason they've gone after these people at certain points is because they've lost control of them. And I think that's exactly the case here.
David, it's been quite a pleasure listening to your takes on the last week. If people want to find you, where can they find you? If you do have any kind of social media presence, that is.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, and I've got a website, www.bookofthelaw.org. And that's it, basically. If people want to find out more, go through that.
go through that. If I'll try and link those if I find them into the chat. But David, thank you for coming on.
Oh, yeah, there's a documentary as well. Sorry. So there's a documentary about my life called thelifeofdave.org. It's called The Life of Dave. It's basically an interview with me talking about my case. Takes you up to about 2020, pre-pandemic. And we haven't talked about the pandemic much, but yeah, it takes you pre-pandemic. And that shows you what my life's like, as well as giving you detail about my whistle blowing and all the other strange things that happened to me. That's The Life of Dave.
.org or .com?
.org. The Life of Dave.
We'll do that. Dave, it's been very interesting. Thank you for coming on the show. Obviously, I know you were on Unprecedented last week, but I thought, obviously, with the obviously the week has gone, I thought perhaps be interested to have you on again, just for the audience to see your opinions on stuff. David, please do come back again. Yeah, and obviously, if anything more, I mean, I hope not. In a way, I don't want any sort of more killings to go on, obviously, but obviously, if they do, I think you'll be the first port of call, I think, for these kind of situations.
Okay, brilliant. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Cool. Have a good day. And goodbye. Take care. Take care. That was David Shayler, former MI5 operative, whistleblower. It's been great. It's been quite. I mean, I've been seeing. Obviously, it is terrible that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I don't wish that upon anyone. But I think people need to keep in mind, again, what Charlie was at the time. I mean, you could argue that there was a road of redemption for him in terms of he was starting to question. And I think he was on his way to basically, well, I mean, we'll never know now, obviously, but I think there is a good chance that he was starting to wake up. But at the end of the day, what Charlie was essentially paid to do was to convert basically a lot of young Americans, of very young, impressionable-minded individuals, to basically have a support for Israel, who I believe, and many others believe, are essentially the power brokers of the West, and basically have a great stranglehold upon this nation and the West in general. I'm trying to find just some. I've been posting so much about it that regardless, the assassination of Charlie Kirk's not been answered why there was a judge. I've got to ask David about that. Jet disabled its location monitor system whilst deporting from Pueblo Airport, 12 minutes from Utah Valley, Pueblo Airport, from 12 minutes from Utah Valley University, 1 hour after Kirk was murdered. This jet is apparently owned by Derek Maxfield, a wealthy donor to the Chabad Lubavitch of Utah. Also, I forgot to mention this as well, is at the time of Kirk's assassination, or at least the day after, when obviously it was news everywhere that Charlie Kirk had been assassinated, is that there was a vote in the Senate, the US Senate, to release the Epstein files. Now, Thomas Massey in America, a congressman, a Republican congressman, or a very rebellious Republican, seems to be the only decent politician in America, it seems. The assassination of Charlie Kirk has two big reasons positive for both the Israel and US regimes. One, Kirk, one of Israel's greatest puppet assets, would go from uni to uni in America, subvert young minds to overall support Israel. However, Kirk of late was starting to awaken to the Zionist power structure of the West. Israel could not have one of their biggest assets rebel, as this would undo all of the work Israel supports by students who treated Kirk like a cult leader. So obviously, if Kirk kept talking about and criticizing the actions of Israel, it is very likely then that many of his young followers who saw Kirk as a leader, similar to how a lot of Tommy supporters see Tommy as this cult-like leader almost, and he can do no wrong, it would have undone all of that work, and the students would have followed Charlie Kirk rather than Israel itself. So it does give motive to why Kirk was shot by Israel. Number two, the death would have distracted from the big Epstein vote in the Senate the following day, where reports of Kirk's murder were everywhere on both mainstream and alternative platforms. One of the main Trump presidential campaign was to end corruption and release the Epstein files. However, since the U-turn, Trump, his admin, and the Republicans, apart from Thomas Massie, have been the main forces attempting to block the release. Both of these reasons are Israel linked, as Epstein was most likely a Mossad asset running a blackmail operation. So you can see that it was multifaceted as to why perhaps Kirk was assassinated. I mean, it's almost cartoonish. I mean, like, apparently the rifle used to assassinate him had transgender, pro-transgender slogans on it, and it had, anti-fascism on it and all of this. And this kind of reminds me of how there were these perfect, intact passports that were found at the rubble in 9/11. It feels almost like, very similar to that, in order to sort of structure some kind of, in some kind of narrative in a way. This is an example of why I wasn't a big fan of Charlie Kirk before. I wasn't a fan of him at all, to be honest with you, because I did see Charlie Kirk as one of these control puppets. Now, obviously, the days leading up to his assassination, I wasn't a regular viewer of Charlie Kirk because I'd already written him off as already a controlled op, basically, individual, in the sense that he was well funded by Israel. This is an example, I think, of how subversion works and why I didn't support Kirk. Obviously, now he was starting to wake up near the end. He was starting to criticize things, but we'll never know exactly how far he would have gone in terms of that. Would he have totally gone against Israel eventually in the end? I don't know. Who knows? But let me read you this. An example of how subversion works. On the left, Charlie Kirk's tweet, which is purposely altered as was paid so to do by Israel. On the right, the actual quote. Let me just show you this. So this was a tweet that was basically retweeted by Geert Wilders, who is a very well-known Dutch politician and likely to be possibly the next prime minister of the Netherlands. He tweeted out, Geert Wilders, Charlie Kirk was 100% right here. Out of respect for him and his bravery, I repeat his true words that are valid for Europe as well. Islam is the sword of the left, is using it to slit the throat of Europe. So that was obviously what Kirk said. Islam is the sword of the left. The left is using to slit the throat of America. Now, Geert Wilders is another pro-Zionist, populist, whatever you want to call it. But this is what I didn't like, is that Charlie Kirk, now whether he just came to this independently and typed this quote, or I think most likely he has purposely altered the actual quote. So what he said is Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. What the actual quote is from a Jewish rabbi. And many rabbis say this quote, as well as other Israeli officials. The quote is, the Jewish Messiah will only appear once Europe and Christianity is totally destroyed. Again, this is part of, briefly at the end of David Shayler's interview there a few minutes ago, we were sort of going down a spiritual route then. But basically this prophecy of Judaic people, and I don't think people like Netanyahu are secular. I do think that they have been indoctrinated in the Judaic faith, and secretly they do believe in these prophecies and the Judaic faith in general. I don't think it is just a show of, oh, look, I'm religious because I happen to be in Israel and I have to put on this little kippah and I have to kiss the wall. I think, no, these people generally do believe this. So there has to be a prophecy where eventually Christianity is destroyed, the land of Edom is destroyed, all of this. Again, people do need to look into this sort of Judaic prophecy stuff, because it's not about whether I believe it or whether you guys believe it. It's that these guys believe it, and that's the dangerous thing about it. They do believe this. The Jewish Messiah will only appear once Christianity is totally destroyed. So I ask you, is it good news that Islam invades Europe? It is excellent news. Islam is the broom of Israel. So that's the quote at the end. Islam is the broom of Israel. That means Islam is almost like a weapon used and wielded by Israel. And what do I mean by that? How do they use Islam as a weapon? Well, if people watched the show last week with Nick Griffin, I spoke about the Greater Israel Project. And the Greater Israel Project is essentially land that Israel wants, empire building essentially. They want most of Europe. Sorry, not most of Europe. They want most of Arabia, essentially, what could be considered Arabia. Let me just play you the video from last week. Now, what the problem is that a lot of people, especially Tommy supporters, they do not know what the Greater Israel Project is. And because they do not know that, they then do not understand why all of these people are then coming over to the UK and other European countries. Some of these other people, whether they are, well, I definitely know Tommy and Katie Hopkins, definitely paid by Israeli proxies or think tanks. They're all paid by these organizations to make sure that you never connect that final dot and understand why these people are coming over. And it's all to do with this, the Greater Israel Project. They're expanding those lands. It's causing mass displacement. And then they're coming over to Dover and various other places around Europe, right? So basically, the Greater Israel Project, they're bombing the surrounding lands. If you can see there, Israel was a very tiny land there within this cursor, if you can see it on screen. Everything else, obviously massive land mass that Israel want to take over. They bomb those land, those people get displaced, and then through NGOs and charities, humanitarian organizations like Israel Aid, they then ship these people out. They get the journey started. It isn't because Israel is this invading, conquering nation. It's a very childish understanding of what is going on in the world. Is that Israel, with the help of the UK and US militaries, they are bombing these lands, and then they end up here. And guess what? When they're here, then these people are very angry. Understandably, they're very angry, and they have no respect for our culture or our women or anything else. You understand the whole rape culture idea now isn't because simply because they're Muslim, and that's a very secondary reason as to what's going on. Does it play a part? Yeah, it might play a part, yes, but it's secondary at best. It's not a primary reason of why they hate us so much. So this is why I don't like this idea, because essentially Kirk has altered the quote of Islam is the broom of Israel, and he has instead changed it, as Gert Wilders, another totally controlled Zionistic puppet. He has purposely butchered, in my opinion, the quotes of Islam is the broom of Israel to Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America, very much keeping people distracted from the true culprits, Israel, and instead distracting people and misdirecting them to think that it's a left versus right issue. It's the matrix, keeping you in that matrix of left versus right. So now all the Charlie Kirk supporters and Tommy Robinson followers, etc., they all think it's a left versus right issue. And all those people like stand up to racism and all that, they're just as brainwashed and moronic as the Tommy followers, really. I'm sorry, but, if there's Tommy followers listening. But keeping in mind, I used to be a Tommy follower myself. I used to be a Tommy tart myself, but then I realized what the bigger picture was, what is going on, how I'm being manipulated. Now, was Charlie on a road of redemption? Possibly. But at the end of the day, this guy was being paid by basically proxies of a foreign nation in order to lie and manipulate the young minds of America. And people need to keep that in mind. Does that, I mean, I don't mean to be crass here, but that does meet the definition of a traitor. And people do need to keep that in mind. Again, I'm not happy of the way that his life ended at all. I think it was very terrible what happened. But is Charlie totally innocent in this? No, absolutely not. He is part of that Zionistic lobby that is keeping people in the dark purposely of what is going on. I mean, according to 5 sources who spoke to the Grey Zone, Charlie Kirk had a heated confrontation with billionaire Zionist Bill Ackman and others at the Hamptons, who hammered the conservative activist for platforming criticism of Israel. The meeting occurred in early August. This is why I think, because obviously, like I said, I saw recent videos. I stopped listening to Charlie Kirk many years ago, but he was starting to question his paymasters, really. George Galloway even has as much as you might like or dislike George Galloway, I think he is still, I think personally a reasonable guy. Yes, he's done some questionable things, especially the Big Brother appearance of Mr. Kitty. But he's always had a reasonably sound political stance, especially his endeavors in the US Senate many years ago, where he really did put those warmongering senators on notice, and they didn't quite expect they didn't do their homework on George Galloway. Let's just put it like that. The Senate, the US Senate at that time. But let's listen. I've not actually listened to this properly myself, but let's just listen to what Galloway had to say about it. I think this was just literally yesterday. Let's listen to what
you don't get to say that it is anti-Semitic to suspect the hand of Israel in the slaying of Charlie Kirk. Partly because you have slain, assassinated more political leaders than any other country on the earth just in my lifetime. Don't make me go back to Lord Moyne. Don't make me go back to Count Bernadotte of Sweden. Don't make me go back to the British sergeants hanging booby-trapped in the orange groves in Jaffa. Don't make me go that far. Let me just stick to my own political lifespan. You, Israel, have been assassinating people all over the world, in Europe, in the Middle East, and further afield, all of my political lifetime. You assassinated almost half of the government of Yemen just 10 days ago. You don't get to say that it's anti-Semitic to suspect you might have had a hand in assassinating Charlie Kirk when you told us to marvel at your percipience and at your ingenuity, your engineering skills, and your patience when you waited years to explode every pager in Lebanon, man, woman, and child, notwithstanding. You don't get to...
That pager assassination. People don't quite understand just how horrific and sinister that was, because you've got to keep in mind, a lot of those people that they killed who were supposedly Hamas terrorists, they were out in public. Bystanders, women and children, etc., they would have got caught in this. What a lot of people don't know as well is that at the funerals of some of those supposed terrorists that Mossad took out, they further detonated more explosions at the funerals of those people in order to take out more people, just to show the power of Mossad in a way. I don't know if people have seen the 60-minute interview on it, on the show 60 Minutes, in America, where they had a Mossad agent on, detailing what had happened. It's very sinister, very dark stuff, yet no one condemned it. The madness when Netanyahu then came over a month later or so to visit Trump on one of his many visits now to the White House. He might as well have a room in the White House now. He visits there so much, Netanyahu. He might as well just take over the Oval Office, really, and just do it and just be honest and say who really rules the US. But he gifted Donald Trump a golden pager, as in to say, well, I mean, you could get so many interpretations from that, but a seriously evil attack. And if they can do that to women and children, if like David Shayler, you believe that they brought down the 9/11 towers and thousands of people were murdered in that, not just, again, the people who worked in there, but, obviously people on the ground, women, children, everything. JFK assassination, which heavily basically states that Israel were involved in the assassination and had motive to do so. If they can do these things to all of those people, then is it really so unbelievable to believe that they took out Charlie Kirk, who was starting to criticize and wake up to the greater agenda? I don't think so. I don't think that is an insane idea. I think that it's very plausible. They have motive. They have the resources to do so. It also acts as a warning to all of the people that are under their control, to say that, a public execution to show, hey, if you don't stay in line, then this is going to happen to you.
Say how good you are at killing, but call it anti-Semitic if somebody suspects that you may have killed Charlie Kirk, especially when there are sundry reasons to suspect that you might. And they're multiplying by the hour. When you scrubbed or caused to be scrubbed from YouTube the entirety of the episode of Charlie Kirk, when he openly states that you stood down on October the 7th, that it was an inside job, that you were responsible for the events on October 7th. Where is it? Where is it, Mr. YouTube? Who told you to scrub that edition? That is circumstantial evidence that Israel wants to disguise the fact that Charlie Kirk, formerly a slavish supporter of all things Israel and a proponent of some mythical, unbreakable Judeo-Christian civilization, had begun to turn decisively against you. He had begun to call the Epstein affair for what it is. He said, the Epstein affair is Mossad. Epstein is Mossad. He said, not me, that he was afraid.
Can you see more? Can you see now? I mean, I didn't even know any of this stuff, because if that episode was scrubbed from YouTube, that he's actually, I did see a video just yesterday, the day before, of him saying that Epstein was a Mossad agent. It's very, I mean, this does, again, I mean, look, it may have been that this transgender individual did perhaps pull the trigger, but how it was organized, it was allowed to occur. Perhaps this guy is a Lee Harvey Oswald in the sense that it's a patsy. I mean, a lot of people don't, people don't know about the JFK thing. I mean, moments after Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested by authorities, he was actually interviewed quite shortly after. Many people haven't seen this, and you could just see by the body language and the interview that he gave to the press that he said, it wasn't me. I work in this book depository place, but I didn't shoot anyone. Obviously you think, well, of course he would say that, but it did give off the vibes that this guy genuinely was just set up in some way. And then obviously days later, when he was being transferred to his trial? I can't remember what it was now. Was he just being transferred somewhere else? Jack Ruby, or real name Jack Rubinstein, shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So we'll never truly know what it was. Just a day after JFK was assassinated, the then Prime Minister of Israel resigned mysteriously. JFK was very much against Israel having nuclear weapons, which again shows motive. I mean, the fact that that Netanyahu had to put out a tweet saying that, no, it wasn't Israel that was involved, further stimulates that perhaps there's something dodgy here. The fact that the Jerusalem Post was the first news outlet in the world to report on Charlie Kirk's death. The fact that Netanyahu tweeted out RIP Charlie Kirk and other words before even the President of the United States did. It's all just very, very convenient, isn't it? It's very strange that all this is happening. The fact that there was a book released a day before Charlie Kirk's assassination called The Shooting of Charlie Kirk. Again, showing insider knowledge and possibly some kind of crude, how can I say it? Crude acknowledgement of insider knowledge, possibly from some form of security agency. I mean, if you know the origin of the CIA and Mossad, they were relatively created within a year of each other. The CIA, before it was formed, it was mostly recruited people from Soviet Russia. And most of these Soviets, these people who had left Soviet Russia, managed to escape and come to America. Most of these recruits were of Jewish heritage. And they say mostly Mossad and CIA are relatively one and the same organization. So when people say, oh, it was an inside job with the two towers, oh, it was a CIA inside job, oh, the CIA killed JFK. Well, the CIA and Mossad are relatively the same organization, if you look into the history of both of them. You know, it further fuels this belief that really the great influence, massive influence that many people don't even realize that is bestowed upon the West. They talk about the Five Eyes, about how the five intelligence services of Britain, America, of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Well, really, there's six eyes because Mossad's in there too. But Mossad never gets a mention. It's strange, isn't it?
Afraid that Israel might harm him. He said, not me, that the pro-Israel donors who had fattened his Turning Point USA organization to the tune of $40 million were now abandoning him and threatening him with complete financial collapse of his organization because he invited Tucker Carlson, the world's preeminent broadcaster, to speak at a Turning Point event in the course of the latter part of this year. He said, not me, that it was passing strange, that it was perfectly permissible to criticize Israel in Israel, but that he and others like him on the conservative right in the United States had to be bullied, bludgeoned, browbeaten, bribed, or threatened with the removal of bribes if they did the same.
And quite interesting stuff from Galloway there. Not properly heard that all before. I've just seen a post from UNN, something about the UKIP leader, Nick Tenconi, who people don't know is also part of Charlie Kirk's sister organization, Turning Point UK. Let's see. Strange is from UNN, David Clues. Strange how Nick Tenconi gets so animated about the blue-haired leftists as anti-Christian, but is best friends with a man who sodomizes his young male fiance. Hopefully Nick will come on UNN when we relaunch, and we can ask him. I very much doubt Nick Tenconi will come on to UNN. Very much doubt, because the only thing is Nick Tenconi, probably many people have seen his videos outside migrant hotels and being involved in these, I don't know, like just debating these blue-haired feminists, etc., and all of that. It's that they seem intellectual when they are debating those said people and outside hotels. However, when they are up against people like myself or David Clues and others, they are made look fools because we are not part of that left and right divide. We're very much out of the plantation of that. We've left the matrix. As you saw perhaps recently when Nick Fuentes and Dinesh D'Souza debated, Nick Fuentes made Dinesh D'Souza, who is considered usually to be an academic, this academic heavyweight, was made look a fool because Nick Fuentes doesn't really subscribe to that. How can I say it? That matrix being anti-Islam, pro-Israel, you know, that kind of plantation. So it's like that's why these people, they will never come on shows like UNN, because they know that they will be absolutely destroyed, because we got, obviously they look intelligent when they're debating stand up to racism, pro hotel migrant people, because those people are just as brainwashed as many of the right wing people. It's not. It's basically low hanging fruit. Ben Shapiro, he goes from university to university debating soft minded students who know nothing about the world. It's basically punching down. And obviously, this is why people like Shapiro and all, they don't go on like these proper shows that can actually debate back. It's all very low hanging fruit. Where was it? Let's go. I'm going to wrap up the show. I think I'm going to head off now, guys. Actually, because I know there's a show starting quite soon. I don't want to eat up other people's time. Sam Hyde, who is a outspoken American comedian. I quite like his takes on a lot of things. He's very what you would call a very wild kind of comedian, in a sense that he can't really be controlled. He made a video of late. Sam Hyde absolutely nails it here. You simply cannot ally with these people. Let's just put the songs, make a few little clips, and then I'm going to go.
The Israel is our hero thing is over. That's the thing that gets these fucking bonehead conservatives caught up every single time, is if I can't beat them, join them. That's done for. It's over. It's not going to happen. You're not going to join them. They're never going to let you into the club. Charlie Kirk was in that club. He started to question the club. Now he's out of the club. You're not. There's no club. You're not in the club. They're going to kill you. They want to kill you. They want to kill your kids. Stop thinking that Israel's going to save you in whatever way, shape, or form, that making a pact with the devil is going to come out good for you. It's not. You're going to get fucked.
Apologies for the bad language there. I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware that last bit. It's thank you, by the way, for Max PS4 Gaming. Might be some kind of YouTube channel. Low hanging fruit, exactly. Glad I found your channel, mate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm going to head off. There's going to be obviously keep watching Unprecedented TV. There's going to be obviously another show shortly after. Someone asked in the chat what's happened to UNN. UNN is just on a hiatus at the moment. It will be back in October. But for now, I'm doing these shows. I probably will continue doing these shows as well as UNN as well to broaden our horizons. But I don't know what the next show. I saw before I came on, Claire Dyer was on the BBC there as I was passing by a pub. It's quite funny. I was watching boomer people watch the BBC, and I was thinking, God, no wonder we're in the state that we're in. Slop of the week. I'm going to start a new thing. Slop of the week goes to Carl Benjamin again, making it twice consecutively. He put out a video basically saying that we are winning based on the rally on Saturday. Now, I was told there was going to be a great revolution and history is going to change after Saturday. Now, I haven't noticed a revolution. I don't know about anyone else, but apparently we are winning. I don't know exactly what we are winning, because it seems as though we're losing more and more and more every day, because people like Carl cannot seem to see the bigger picture. And I think, frankly, people like Carl Benjamin, people like, I'm trying to think of others, ex-Paz, I'm sure people will put some comments in the chat here. All of these people, Jeff Taylor, they are just incapable of seeing the bigger picture. They are just totally out of touch. And this is not winning. This is very much losing. Complete hopium/copium slop. We are not winning when most of the dissident movement is controlled by Zionistic influence. We won't. And this is what it's all about. It's from UNN, and I totally agree with it. The brave people of Palestine have had their land stolen from them, children murdered, women raped, skin harvest every day. Every day they struggle to regain their freedom from Zionist control, which is the control we need freed from. Yet on the stage yesterday, a group of cannibal descendants ripped up their flags to shreds, to cheers and applause. This is what the entire purpose of the event was, to co-op support for the genocidal Zionist energy. I think that's what it was. I think that really it was a show to basically show that the Zionist influence has great control, even greater control, probably the greatest control it's ever had on the UK. And it was brought to you by people like Tommy Robinson. Right, guys, I've got to head off. Thank you all for listening. Please do keep in mind on Unprecedented YouTube and Twitter, and for more shows. Take care, guys. Thank you very much.